A couple weeks ago, we took a look at these 5 different types of articles that you can write: hard news, features, reviews, op-eds, and sports. And we kind of took a cursory look at them, so I wanted to take some time to actually go a little bit deeper into each one, because that way we can start to connect each type of article with a type of structure. The first we're going to look at is hard news. Hard news is, of course, the breaking news, the news that is most important that we want to get out to our readers as quickly and efficiently as possible. Hard news uses what's called a hard lead, which is something we're going to look at in much more depth next week. But for your purposes this week, it's suffice it to say that the hard leads are the who, what, where, when, why, and how. These are the most important information about the story. And then, of course, following our inverted pyramid structure, dead giveaway here by this slide. These slides, by the way, I borrowed from another professor that I stumbled across online. So I've tried hard to find them again to attribute this properly. So I apologize if the originator of these slides is watching this. I wish I could attribute them better, but the best I can do is to say that these are not mine, but I owe a great debt to those who created it. Anyway, hard news, the inverted pyramid is the way to go. You start out with those most important who, what, where, when, why, how, and then you start to put all of your pieces in place, one after the other, in descending order of importance until you're finally down to just the fluff background details that are nice to know but not essential to the story at the bottom. The thing to keep in mind here is this note that it says here about trying to find a way that makes the reader feel interested in this information. And this, of course, is foci, trying to find the interest elements within the article that will actually make this stuff more than just dry, cold, lifeless facts set into some sort of logical order. Trying to pick out the right facts for your audience and which facts to emphasize and how to write about them in a way that will connect with the conflicts that they're embroiled in, the impact it will have on them, give a sense of immediacy, involving a famous person, whatever the case may be. Features differ from hard news in that they are hard news that can wait. It's something that might be important, but it's just as important if we learned it 2 weeks from now, or a month from now, or a year from now, as if we learned it right now at this moment. In this sense, it's news that can wait, and usually ends up having more of a human interest element rather than a fact-based element. So because of this, we can start to stray from this inverted pyramid a bit and start to get a little bit broader with our approach. It uses what's called a soft lead, or in this case, an anecdotal lead, and these we'll talk about again next week when we discuss leads. But the point here is that it makes it a little bit more of a broader introduction, a little bit more of an exposition, rather than just diving into the most important information first. You're sort of setting the scene a little bit more here. And then you might find that you may not even have all of the 5 W's and 1 H, in which case you might need what's called a nut graph. These are especially useful when you don't have all of the facts at your disposal, but you still need to tell the story. So maybe you use some other sort of introduction, but then you might use, for example, an anecdote about someone who's experiencing the situation you're talking about. Then in the nut graph, you're telling in a nutshell how that story relates to the rest of your point, how that story illustrates the rest of the 5 W's and 1 H, however many of them you do have, the rest of the facts as they may be. So this is a very short sort of transition point between your introduction and what goes on to then be more or less an inverted pyramid structure. Now you have a little more flexibility with this inverted pyramid. It doesn't have to be so rigidly descending order of importance. You're focusing more here on narrative arc, on having a beginning, a middle, an end, having a climax, building a sense of conflict, maybe having more emotional impact. So this is where you can maybe shift things around so that maybe they're not the most important things first, but it builds to a sense of importance. You want to, this is why we call it narrative, right? This is the narrative structure is usually the one that we would want to go with, because you're building a narrative. You're actually gradually building towards the climax, and then you're paring down to the details and facts as they're pertinent. Reviews. So reviews are a very particular sort of article because most people get them very confused with opinions. And it turns out that reviews have nothing to do with your opinion. This is why art professors are able to grade their students' work. Even if they don't like the students' work personally, they still should be able to grade them objectively based on a prearranged set of criteria, an objective set of criteria. And that's the most important thing to remember when writing a review. We are not reviewing based on our opinion so much as we are reviewing based on an objective set of criteria as to whether this movie or play or music or artwork, whatever the thing that we're reviewing is, as to whether it is successful in meeting those criteria. And so reviews, you can go a few different ways. Maybe you want to go a narrative direction where you tell a short story or something to open up the set the stage, and then pare down to the nuts and bolts of where it goes right and where it goes wrong. Or you might want to take an hourglass approach. Now remember, an hourglass starts with the 5 W's and 1 H, starts with the inverted pyramid, so it lays out all the facts. Maybe you need to tell when this movie is coming out, the details of who produced it, all of the facts that build up just a general understanding of what you're about to talk about. And then you can start to balloon out and talk about this, the successes and failures, the range of opinions, the summary of the work, and all of this stuff. So you would take an hourglass approach, paring down with the inverted pyramid and then expanding out after a point of transition in the middle. Op-eds are where you actually get to start expressing your own personal opinion. Usually in journalism, this is a huge no-no, right? We want to stay objective, we want to stay fact-based. However, we are allowed as journalists to have opinions. In fact, it's inevitable that we will have opinions, and there is a forum to express those opinions. The most important part is that we are clear and transparent that these are indeed our opinions and not try and pass them off as facts. This is why we have an entire section called opinions and editorials in newspapers. So the difference between an opinion and an editorial is an opinion represents the views of the writer. An editorial represents the official views of the publication. So, for example, the New York Times might put out an opinion article where it has some contributing author, maybe even just a random person who writes and submits into the newspaper, express their opinion on some subject. Then the New York Times is able to say, this is this author's opinion. It does not in any way reflect the opinions of the New York Times. However, these are worth considering. An editorial is when the New York Times publishes this article and says, these are the officially endorsed opinions of the New York Times as expressed by this author. So the two are actually written exactly the same. It's really only a difference in nomenclature so that we don't get confused over whose opinion it is, whose biases we should be considering, all of that stuff. So again, you have some wiggle room here. You might want to take a narrative arc where you're sort of building a range of ideas and arguments and positions and back and forth, and having more of an introduction leading to a middle climax, then paring down to any background information as you close to the end. Or you might want to take an hourglass approach where you start with all the facts and you lay out the scene by saying the who, what, where, when, why, how, and all of the most important facts until you have a base of understanding before you then balloon out and take more of a narrative arc. Finally, we have sports. And sports are kind of a beast unto its own. It's its own monster here, because sports has taken on a life of its own in that it can actually be all of the others combined. You can easily find examples of sports articles that are hard news. You can easily find narratives. You can easily find features. You can easily find opinion pieces. You can easily find reviews. Sports can be all of these things. And as such, they can be the inverted pyramid. They can be used in the narrative sense. They can be used with an hourglass. They can also be used with circular chronological. Circular chronological, I should note, we mentioned previously in the section preceding this video, circular chronological is just another way to write a fact-based hard news article when instead of having the most important fact first and the least important fact last, it's important to make sure we get them in order. And we don't want to take them out of their timeline or else it could get confusing. So you usually start with where you ended up, where we are currently, and then you go back to the beginning and you circle around until you get back to where we are now. So you might say something like, the police chase, we've just found out that on I-287, cops are in hot pursuit of a vehicle going 80 miles an hour southbound. And then you go back to the beginning. It all started when a gas station attendant called the police after being robbed at gunpoint. Then you keep moving chronologically. The suspect fled the scene and police were hot on its tails, yada, 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 and you bring it back around to, and now this is where we are now with them hot in pursuit. We'll let you know what else is coming down the pike. So here you can see where these connect. This is your cheat sheet, right? So hard news is probably going to be the inverted pyramid or the circular chronological. Features is almost always going to be narrative. Reviews, probably narrative or hourglass, although you might find that you actually start borrowing some from persuasive essays. Now, the odds of you actually using a full fleshed out persuasive essay structure is pretty slim. It just won't hold up journalistically and it won't appeal to the audience in the same way. But you might find you borrow some strategies as you're reviewing and trying to convince the reader of your assessment. Same with opinions and editorials. You may be borrowing some from persuasive, but again, you're going to be pretty much focusing on a narrative or an hourglass structure. You don't have to worry about the inverted pyramid or circular chronological in these situations because you're not so worried about getting the facts across as quickly and efficiently as possible. You're more worried about building a robust argument or a robust understanding of the material. And sports, it's a free-for-all, right? You're borrowing from all of them. Could be inverted pyramid, it could be narrative, could be hourglass, could be circular chronological, depending on the story. If you're covering the late-breaking trade deadline moves that a team is making, you might be giving out the facts in an inverted pyramid style. However, if you're talking about a feature article about the team's new head coach, you might take a narrative approach. You might end up writing a review of the playbook that they have just released to the public, in which case you might be taking a narrative or an hourglass approach. Or you might be writing an opinion or editorial article about whether you think this team has what it takes to make it all the way this season. You might be writing about using a narrative or an hourglass approach for that as well. Or you might be doing play-by-play, in which case it's really important to have a circular chronological structure, or else you won't be able to tell what play came before what other play. So these are usually the ways to go. Now, of course, these are not set in stone, especially with the advent of convergent journalism, citizen journalism, the rise of blogging, the rise of people who just simply don't know what they're doing but like to write and like to have an opinion. The door has been blown wide open for all kinds of alternative, unconventional, unorthodox structures. But these are your main structures that you'll want to keep to. Again, as we saw with grammar, you need to learn the rules before you break them, or else you start breaking things you didn't even know shouldn't be broken in the first place and start not breaking things you should be breaking. It just gets very messy and you have to clean up a lot of broken stuff. So stick with these for now, and then as you go and get more experienced, if you want to start stretching and combining and breaking out of these molds, then that's certainly your journalistic prerogative. So we've come a long way. We started out just trying to figure out the landscape of convergent journalism, how citizen journalism arose, how consumers became producers, the shift from one to many, becoming many to many, and how we got into this mess in the first place. Once we understood that, we started looking at branding strategies so that we can responsibly take our voice to an audience in a way that is clear and consistent and constant, and can build good brand recognition. And then we had to figure out our audience. So we started connecting with our audience, taking the 5 W's and 1 H and foci, and actually turning them on the audience and trying to ask questions of them to see who are they and what makes them tick. We then started segmenting them up into geographic, demographic, and psychographic segments based on what they're interested in, where they live, or what identifying traits they may have in common. That allowed us to find a beat that we'd want to cover. And these beats could be thematic, based on industry or topic, geographic, based on a location, or conceptual, based on ideas or shared values. And once we have a beat, we have to fill it with articles. So we started looking at what we just discussed today, these 5 different types of articles: hard news, features, op-eds, reviews, and sports. So then we had to fill those articles with some content. So we started gathering some facts. We talked to sources. These sources could be primary, quotable secondary, unquotable secondary, or background, considering all the while that these sources have biases. They may be stakeholders with something to gain or lose with the information they give us, the pathos that it conveys to the audience and how the audience might connect, and the facticity of what these sources are telling us. So, not content to just trust that they are being honest, we should be fact-checking. We shouldn't assume, we shouldn't extrapolate, we should give adequate context, and we should make sure we're getting all of the subtleties and technicalities correct, because they count, especially when you have an intelligent audience who knows what you're talking about, which is increasingly the case when you have more and more specific beats, because you're now catering to more of a niche audience. Once you have all this in place, we said that you are now equipped to become this tour guide through the postmodern Wikipedia haze, this partial truth of alternative facts, weird landscape that we're in now. So now, with all of the purview of the stuff that we can fill our article with, we have to actually get down to the nuts and bolts of writing it. And that's where we entered our grammar section. And we started figuring out how to physically put words together in a way that is clear and contextually sound, as well as correct. So now, today, what we did is then once we have these words, we have to put them into some logical order and logical structure so that they can be conveyed properly to our audience. So based on whatever type of article you're writing, we looked at the different types of structures, particularly inverted pyramid, narrative, hourglass, and circular chronological. So if you're looking for an easy workflow, what you're going to want to do as you're thinking about writing this first article is you're going to want to consider your audience and what gets them going, what makes them tick, what they might connect to. Think about your content, what facts you have, and what type of article that lends itself to. And then think about what type of structure that article might be helped by. Is it hard news where you'd want an inverted pyramid or circular chronological structure? Or is it a feature article where you might want a narrative structure, and so on? And then start putting pen to paper and try and figure out how to make this make grammatical sense, but also make it connect in a way that is contextually sensitive to your audience. Good luck.